Welcome to Whoviana, an unofficial Doctor Who podcast hosted by the official Josh Nares. Whoviana is for the woman who loves when Nyssa holds a gun but opposes the right to bear arms. Today, we're going to be doing a retrospective on the 13th Doctor's era, but first, why are people dirty little sluts for Doctor Who Cliffhangers? All that and more in this episode of Whoviana! You're joking. Another one? We're back again for yet another episode of Whoviana. Today, we're going to be talking about the 13th Doctor's era, which I know is a bit controversial. Some people love it, some people hate it. Some people love to hate it, and some people hate to love it. It's the era that really brings people out of the woodworks. People get really mad. But I think we're now at a point where enough time has passed. It's been over a year since Power of the Doctor aired. I think we're ready to start talking all things Jodie. I'm ready to talk about all things Jodie. Heads up, I am going to be critical about this era. There are things I love and there's things I don't love. So you're going to get a bit of both. But I'm not going to be an asshole about it. You know, there's a lot of people on this site who just like really want the head of Chris Chibnall and they really want them dead. And, you know, I'm not that type of girl. But we're going to get full into it in just a... Did you hear that? I think someone's trying to call the manager.
Excuse me, I'd like to speak to your manager.
Welcome to The Full Karen, a segment where I complain about something about Doctor Who or something completely unrelated. It's my podcast, my rules, and if you don't like it, I'll speak to your manager. Why are people sluts for Doctor Who cliffhangers? Why are people desperate for every single Doctor Who episode to end on a cliffhanger? Whereas I think the vast majority of cliffhangers in classic Doctor Who kind of suck. Don't get me wrong, I think some of the best moments in Doctor Who are surrounded by cliffhangers. Like just ones that come to mind, like The Ambassadors of Death is such a boring story, but it has one of the best cliffhangers ever in episode 2. It ends with this pod returning from Mars and there's supposed to be humans in it and the Doctor's trying to like contact them and they're just repeating the same answer. And it gets to a point where he's just asking like ludicrous questions like, how many beans make 5? And they have the same answer. And he's like, right, cut it open. Brilliant. Love that. Or like the cliffhanger to episode 1 of Earthshock, where it's like the Cybermen finally appear and they're like, destroy them at once. Camp. Love that. Excellent. And there's just so many more. The list goes on. There's so many great cliffhangers. And I think when it comes to the new series, I think they kind of nail the cliffhanger every time. And I think the reason why they nail it every time, most times, is because they're not forced to happen every single week. If an episode in Doctor Who is a 2-parter, there's usually a good reason for that. Because nowadays, you know, Stephen Moffat has said, you know, like doing a 2-parter is no cheaper than doing 2 individual episodes anymore. Just reusing sets and locations and that, it's not really saving any money like it used to. So if something is a 2-parter in the new series, it's because the story kind of requires it. And you think of like really great cliffhangers like Donna Noble has left the library, Donna Noble has been saved, all that type of stuff. It's like really big stakes and you really don't know how they're going to resolve it. A great example of when we're seeing a cliffhanger every week doesn't always need to work is in Flux. I think that season had a lot of really great cliffhangers, but some were just like, they were just there because they had to be. It had to lead into the next episode. I think like Village of the Angels is one people always talk about how much they love it, where, you know, the Doctor gets turned into a weeping angel and gets transported somewhere. And we're like, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And then it just kind of gets quickly resolved. It's just like a transportation device. It's not anything big. I think the cliffhanger itself isn't always the problem. It can be really great and exciting. It's just the resolution can sometimes be really, really boring and bland. Or not so much boring, but sometimes like uneventful. Or it doesn't match the excitement of the cliffhanger, the possibility of the cliffhanger. Because I've heard a lot of people complain about how they hate cliffhangers where the Doctor's life is in danger or the companion's life is in danger halfway through the season because they know obviously they're going to turn up in the next episode. But it isn't necessarily the point that they don't die. It's how they get out of that scenario. That's the thing that's exciting. But if it's just like the Doctor and companion get cornered in a hallway and someone holds up a gun and says, I'm going to shoot you right now, You know what's going to happen in the next episode. You know exactly what's going to happen. They're going to about to fire, and then someone's going to come out of the woodwork and be like, stop. I need to talk to the doctor about something very important. Don't shoot them. And then it's just resolved like that. And it's like, obviously that's what's going to happen. So I feel like those type of cliffhangers I don't want to see again. And I feel like the majority of classic series cliffhangers are that. And from a storytelling perspective, it's quite limiting because every 25 minutes or so, the writer has to stop their story to a grinding halt to end it on a pointless cliffhanger that doesn't really add anything to the story. Sometimes it does. Sometimes a cliffhanger completely changes the story. Like, for example, in The Invasion of Time, where the first half of the story, we're with one villain, and then a cliffhanger reveals a brand new villain. And that type of stuff, that cliffhanger stuff really works. I just feel like if a cliffhanger is going to be there, I just hope the actual ramifications of that cliffhanger changes the story. It doesn't need to completely like 180 the story and turn it into something completely different, but it should be some sort of change that forwards the narrative and not just like brings it to a halt. And then, of course, we end up in the cliffhanger acting, which plagued the Davison era, where, you know, like something like Terminus, where that guy is like, we're in a leper colony, we're all gonna die. And it's like, wow, let's bring it down. That's not how anyone would perform that scene. It's just so dramatic and over the top. But they feel like they need to because it needs to like go straight into that cliffhanger sound and be this big moment. You're like, oh, how are they going to get out of this one? But like it just doesn't necessarily match the type of acting the rest of the story has. Or you've got stuff like nothing in the world can stop me now, like in the Underwater Menace, which is funny because like when they did like the remount in the next episode, so when they do the cliffhanger reprise, in the 60s, a lot of the time they just re-recorded the whole scene because it was easier than playing back the last episode into the new one. Just because of technology limitations. They could do it, and they did do it, but sometimes it was just easy just to reshoot the scene. And the episode 2 cliffhanger being like, nothing in the world can stop me now. And then the episode 3 reprise, he's like, nothing in the world can stop me now. And then just continues the scene. Because like, obviously that you can't match that height the next week. You just can't. It just feels insane. Which is interesting as well. I found out, at the time of recording this, I haven't seen the new Underwater Menace animation. But the BFI screening, people said that they took the cliffhanger of episode 2, the audio from that, and put it in episode 3 in the reprise. So you get the big performance both times because it is iconic and it's brilliant and I love it so much. But then you get some of the worst cliffhangers like in Dragonfire where the Doctor literally climbs over this like fence and like hangs off a cliff from his umbrella for apparently no reason. Maybe in the original script it made sense, but it just did not translate to screen. It just comes across as like a really embarrassing, like meta thing about cliffhanger and taking it really literally. And I just don't think it paid off. But really what I want to say is I do love cliffhangers. I think they're great. And I think when they're needed and when they're relevant, they're some of the best things about Doctor Who. But I think this desire to have them at the end of every single episode is insane. And I think it just comes down to people not really knowing how to write and just remembering all the good stuff and not remembering the bad stuff. I just think it could be quite limiting for a writer to really try and shoehorn in a cliffhanger at the end of every single episode when it doesn't necessarily need it. Especially because Big Finish will be out of their minds if every single episode goes to a cliffhanger, because how would they fit 1,000 stories in between 2 episodes? Won't somebody think of Big Finish? Why doesn't anyone care about Nicholas Briggs? What's he going to do? Won't somebody think of that man? Well, we'll be right back after this message from... What's that? No! No! All right. Today, we're going to be talking about the 13th Doctor. We're going to be talking about her era. And then we're going to be talking about the Doctor Who magazine poll. And we're going to be talking about the top 3 stories and the bottom 3 stories ranked by Doctor Who magazine readers. And just give my opinions, thoughts, feelings, and emotions on those stories. But first, I just want to talk about a general overview of my experience with the 13th Doctor's era. I remember when Jodie was like first announced and they had that specially shot trailer where she's like wearing the hood and all that stuff and that type of stuff. And I remember feeling like this show was going to be completely rewritten. It was going to be a completely brand new show. It really needed that excitement of a new showrunner. Like, I love Stephen Moffat's work and I love his run on Doctor Who, but I think it's good for a show after a while to change up producer and have like a new voice on the show and a new perspective. And I thought Chris Chibnall could give that. I was not a huge fan of Chris Chibnall's episodes that he had written in the past. The only one I kind of liked was 42. But I was a Torchwood girly, so I loved his work on Torchwood, especially if we're talking Torchwood, like season 2, where he was basically running the show at that point. That show had so much like emotion and character work, and I really loved what he did with the show. So I was like, well, if he can show run Torchwood, I'm hoping he brings those types of elements to Doctor Who. Not the adult stuff, but like the characters, these really like fleshed out people with really interesting dynamics. And for a long time, I was really interested in having a female doctor because we hadn't had one before. And I thought it would bring new types of stories to tell, having a more feminine perspective on the role of the doctor would be interesting as well. I was really looking forward to the show being so different. I really wanted it to be like a fresh new start, not because I hated the past, just because I was excited for something new. And when the first season came around, I was really underwhelmed. I thought it looked great. I thought Jodie did a great job, especially in that first episode. I was like, this feels really fresh and new, and I'm excited to see what happens. And then after that first episode, it just wasn't like that at all. And after the season finished, I felt like I didn't connect with any of the companions. I didn't feel like I really connected with the Doctor. I didn't really know what she stood for. I didn't feel like she was the hero of her own story. I felt like she constantly found herself in situations where she was an observer rather than someone who was forwarding the plot. The story is happening around her and she just is along for the ride. And you get in episodes like Rosa and the Demons of the Punjab where the Doctor just witnesses it. She can't do anything. She just has to watch. Like she's getting cucked in her own series. And like stuff like Rosa, I think like obviously you don't want a white woman doctor coming in and saving the day in that scenario. Like it's a story about Rosa Parks, and for the Doctor to come in and take over, it would be, I think, really distasteful and wrong. But it's more of like a recurring theme I see about her Doctor is that she never seems to be forwarding the plot. But anyway, I think with like season 11, it didn't feel fun and it didn't feel like high emotion. And I just felt like it wasn't the type of Doctor Who that I like. But I felt with series 12, it started to change. I felt like they took aboard that criticism and they really injected a lot of fun. And you get stuff like Spyfall, which is just full of so many like action pieces and big fun, big stuff. I think series 12, I resonated with that a lot more and I was much more on board. And there was a more emphasis on like big twists and like big character stuff and big series changing lore. And if you're into like lore and stuff like that, I think you would enjoy series 12, especially with the introduction of the fugitive Doctor, which really appealed to my own interests. I think Jo Martin is just incredible on screen, but I'm going to go into her a bit more later on. And then it introduced the Timeless Children arc, which was very controversial. And for me at the time, I wasn't like hugely in love with it. Especially the episode where like the Master's just like talking to the screen, explaining the entire backstory like it's a TARDIS wiki entry. And it was just like, what is this? But I was like, I'm going to reserve judgment. I just want to see what they do with this storyline. Because if there's interesting stories to tell around the Timeless Child arc, then I'm all for it. Because it's unlocking this whole new era of the Doctor that we don't know about. So there could be some really interesting stories in there. But then we came across to Flux and it was teased and it was teased and it was teased. And then eventually the Doctor decides not to know anything more about it and throws away the fob watch, which had all the answers. And, Chris Chibnall went on to say that like it was an allegory for his own adoption. And, the big takeaway was that the Doctor chose not to learn more because the Doctor's the Doctor regarding how she came to be. Like it wasn't important. And I think when you think of it from the adoption viewpoint, you can understand that type of story. But I feel like with Doctor Who, when we do these story arcs and they end on something more conceptual, rather than big. It doesn't always go down well. Like the hybrid was very much like a concept rather than this big, huge, threatening thing. And I think Doctor Who audiences, and including myself, expect something bigger. We're expecting to see stuff. We're expecting to see spectacle. And when it comes down to something that's a small character stuff, it doesn't necessarily translate. Because I think the Doctor's choosing, it doesn't change who I am, is important. And I think that's how it should have ended either way. But I think I would have liked the Timeless Children stuff to be added onto to learn more about it. And then once the Doctor does know, she decides, you know what? That's not me, babes. I'm happy with who I am. And then she throws it away and everyone's happy. It's the same ending. It's the same conceptual narrative for the Doctor, but it's a bit more exciting to watch because it comes across as that Chris Chibnall wrote this thing but didn't know what to do with it. You know, it kind of felt like, oh, the Doctor has all these incarnations before William Hartnell. And it's like, cool, what are you going to do with that? And he's like, I don't know. I'm just the lead writer. it doesn't really, yeah. But I did love Flux. I love the idea of doing like an overarching story for an entire series. But it does always come down to that problem where the first half are all really incredible episodes and then they fumble the bag in the last few. And that's in my opinion. Some people love the ending. I don't know who, but some people do, I'm sure. Because especially in Flux, where you've got stuff like War of the Sontarans and Village of the Angels, I think are some of Jodie's best episodes so far. Especially like War of the Sontarans, I think in that episode, Jodie really got to be the Doctor. She really like stood up and got to like control the show when like her companions were gone. I think Jodie can really hold the screen by herself. She doesn't need 3 companions by her side. She can do it. I just don't think she was really given the chance very often. And I think War of the Sontarans is possibly one of my favorite episodes of hers because of that. And then Jodie's era ended on 3 specials, which I'm going to go into a bit more detail later. But it kind of felt like Jodie's era was going out with a whimper more than a bang. You know, you've got these 3 specials and it's all to do with like COVID as well, because, you know, she got like kind of a short season and then 3 specials just because of COVID. It's a miracle that we even got them, you know, and I think what they managed to pull off was incredible. And I really don't know how they did it. Overall, a lot of her era I loved and a lot of it didn't resonate with me. I think there's a lot of good individual episodes and I think Jodie was the right person to cast. I do think she was the right person. But the overall story and the characters, I didn't resonate. These were characters I didn't really care about. Like with Yaz, like she was around the whole time and I felt like I barely got to know her, which sucks because I think Man of Gill was great. But it kind of felt more like the classic series of Doctor Who. Like these companions have some like background and you know a little bit about them, but really you don't really know them that well. Like Ryan and Yaz, like we know things about them, but I feel like I don't relate to them or care about them. But that also could be because I'm getting older and maybe I don't resonate with people who are characters who are younger than me as much anymore. I don't know. But then again, like in 2008, when I was 13, I resonated with Donna Noble and she was a lot older than I was at that time, you know? So I don't know. I don't know what was wrong, but it didn't resonate with me whatsoever. And the worst thing is when Chris Chibnall announced that he was leaving along with Jodie, I was kind of relieved. I felt like they did everything they could do. And I gave them the benefit of the doubt the whole time, but I just don't think that era worked. And I don't think it captured the audience that I think it could have. You know, I mentioned on a previous episode where I was saying that, you know, Jodie's first episode had 11 million viewers. 11 million people tuned in, but they didn't stick around. And I said in that as well, I don't think it's because it's a female Doctor. I just don't think it resonated with people. And the final few people in my life who are watching Doctor Who still just stopped. And there's no one I know in my life who watches Doctor Who, except for my Doctor Who friends that I made over Twitter, who I see in real life now. And it's like, that's it. But now with Russell coming back, I'm hearing a lot of people who did watch the show are trying it again. And let's see if they can retain an audience. I have good faith that Russell could, but we just have to wait and see, really. But if you haven't given the Jodie era a go, please do it. You know, there's lots of people I know who this is their favorite era of Doctor Who. They love it, love it, love it. And just because you're hearing people online saying that it's shit, it doesn't mean that's right. Everyone likes different stuff, you know, so please give it a go and formulate your own opinion. Don't just copy and paste what other people are saying online because it's not worth your time. And you don't have to say this era is good or this era is bad. You know, criticism and enjoyment of a show exists in shades of grey. There's going to be stuff you love and stuff you don't like in the era. So yeah, don't be a hater, but don't like pretend that you love everything when you don't. Just be authentic. For the 60th anniversary, Doctor Who magazine put out a poll where readers got to rank each episode a score out of 10. Before I talk about the top 3 and the bottom 3, Doctor Who magazine, for some reason, decided to include the entirety of Flux as just one story. I think the reason they did this was because historically, Doctor Who magazine counted Trial of a Time Lord as one story, even though it's 4 stories in one. Which I believe is fine if they're doing in their features and stuff like that. But when it comes to ranking episodes, I don't think it's the best way of doing it. Plus, you're cutting out a whole bunch of Jodie's era and putting it into one little box. And I don't think that's right. And ultimately, in this poll, Flux is ranked as number 12, which I think is insane. You know, stuff like Village of the Angels and War of the Sontarans is some of the best of Jodie's era, and is relegated to number 12 because it's put next to stuff like The Vanquishers. You know, it's not fair. Like, I think that the quality of those two stories are completely different. I just think it's a huge mistake. It's huge. And, you know, I think Doctor Who magazine should hang its head in shame. I think you should take a good, long, hard look at yourself, Doctor Who magazine, and think, what the hell is wrong with me? Figure it out. Just kidding. I love Doctor Who magazine. Like, if you're not a subscriber to Doctor Who magazine, definitely give it a go if you can afford it, because I just have a digital subscription and every now and then I'll get like a hard copy, because my YouTube channel, like a lot of like the documentary type stuff I've done, I couldn't do it without Doctor Who magazine. Like their research and stuff is insane. Like if you love behind the scenes stuff, it's incredible for it. And also every now and then they might put one of my videos in the suggested section in Doctor Who magazine. So we're kind of besties. All right, so let's look at Doctor Who magazine's top 3. We've got as number 1, The Power of the Doctor. Number 2, The Haunting of Villa Diodati. And for number 3, we have Fugitive of the Jadoon. None of these 3 surprised me. Even though I wouldn't put The Power of the Doctor as number 1, there are a few reasons why I think it was number 1. Obviously, recency bias is a pretty common thing. You know, The Day of the Doctor was ranked number 1 when that first came out. Also, it's a multi-Doctor story, kind of. And, you know, it's a lot of fan wank in it and people do resonate with that. People love that type of stuff. So I wasn't surprised. And I wasn't mad either. Because, you know, I enjoy the vast majority of this story. I think it's so much fun. And it's definitely something you can rewatch over and over again. I think it has similar, like, vibes to The Five Doctors, where, like, the story's, like, not the most priority thing. It's all the little elements and the weird stuff that goes on and how much fun it is. And also, for me personally, I love that Ace came back. And it's not just because, like, look, Ace is there. I felt like she had unfinished business, because in the Seventh Doctor era, they were never given a proper finale episode. Ace never got to say goodbye to the Doctor because the series ended abruptly. So when Ace comes back and she has a scene with like the Doctor talking about how they left and stuff like that, I think it needed that. I think her character deserved closure, especially because Ace as a character was possibly the most fully fledged, like fleshed out character of the classic series when it came to companions. So she really deserved a proper goodbye. And although I think Ace returning is enough for like a single story, but Ace's return is just one of a million things that is going on in that story. Like it's not just Ace that's back, it's also Tegan. The Master's there, the Daleks, the Cybermen, you know, every man and their dog is there. There's so many different ideas and it doesn't really focus on just one. It wants to have all of them, which feels like the Five Doctors, where, you know, you've got every Doctor coming back. You've got a whole bunch of companions. You've got different monsters and villains all there. You've got the Time Lords. It's exciting. It's big. And I think this was trying to do that as well. And you know what? I think it succeeded. I think this is a story that you could sit down and watch just for fun, just to get a full dose of Doctor Who goodness in one big go. But is it a great story? I don't know. I think my issue with this story is that it's not the 60th special of Doctor Who. It is Jodie Whittaker's departure episode. It's her regeneration episode. That happens to be a centenary special. And the story doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be an anniversary centenary special, or does it want to be a regeneration story? Because I think it has chosen it wants to be a celebration of Doctor Who as a whole. If I was in Chris Chibnall's position, I would have made that decision too, because Chris made it very clear he didn't know that Russell was going to take over. He said this on multiple times. They thought the show was dead. I think it was Matt Strevens who said, "We're not sure if we've killed the show." You know, he said this at a convention. He was like, "We thought this was the final episode, so we ended it on Jodie regenerating, and that was it. With the future could be whatever." And you can tell that from Jodie's final words, like, "Doctor whoever you are," you know, like it's very much, they think this is the end of the show. On a side note, I don't love that. I don't love that the BBC didn't tell Chris Chibnall and the team that the show was going to continue, because Russell T Davies has said on multiple occasions that he knew that he was taking over Doctor Who way before that episode was finished filming. I feel like it should be common courtesy that the BBC tell the current showrunner, "We're not cancelling the show. We've got plans. We don't know what we're doing yet, but we're planning on continuing the show. It's not dead in the ground. Don't worry. You haven't killed Doctor Who. Thank you for your time. Deuces." But instead they leave them with this, "Oh, the show's over." And because they think the show's over, of course they're going to write this big anniversary special where it celebrates the entirety of Doctor Who, because they think it's the final episode ever until it gets rebooted or whatever in the future, or possibly not. I think that's wrong. And I'm hoping that's just my interpretation of some quotes that have been misguided. And it's not some evil, malicious plot that they've decided to cut Chris Chibnall out of these plans. Maybe when he was writing the episode, he thought this was it, and there was no one in line to take over at that point. And they were like, "Look, we're going to production. If someone is coming in, they're not ready for us. Therefore, we're just going to end it how we're going to end it." But yeah, either way, it doesn't sit right with me and I don't like it. It seems really unprofessional. But either way, I wasn't there. I don't know. This could be just all made up in my head. I've made up this evil anti-Chibnall agenda from the BBC. It's probably completely fictional. I don't know. I'm just completely making this up from quotes. But because it's focusing more on an anniversary spin rather than a regeneration story, Jodie's barely in this episode. I think it has the same issue that Twice Upon a Time has, and I've talked about this on my YouTube channel before in a different video about fan wank. She regenerates halfway through and then the Master takes over, so she's not around. And then a bunch of old bastards turn up from the classic series, who I love. I'm being mean because I think it's funny. I love them and I'm very happy they were there. But, you know, it all becomes about the cameos. It's like, oh, look, it's Paul McGann in his costume. Oh, look, it's this. It's everyone. Everyone's here. And it becomes less about her regenerating. And it's just another one of those instances where Jodie's Doctor is not the main character of her story. She's once again just going along with events. And yeah, I think it's a bit sad. But if we're not looking at it from that perspective, if we're just looking at it as a fun episode, I love this story. I think it's great. But when we're talking about, is it a good regeneration story for Jodie? I don't think it is. I don't think it encompasses her era. It tricks you into thinking it's going to talk about the timeless children at the beginning in the train, but then it doesn't. You know, so that it doesn't really feel like it's a closure to her story. But I ain't spending any more time on it because we've got other stories to talk about and I could be here all day. Number 2 is The Haunting of Villa Diodati, which I think is one of the greatest stories in Jodie's era. I would put it as probably my number 1. My number 2. I'll talk about my number 1 later. I think this is one of those stories where all the elements come together. I think the soundtrack is great. I think the performances are great. I think the script is great. I think how it's shot is great. I love the locations. I think it's one of those stories where all the elements come together and it's magic. And it's so hard to do that on any show where you get all the elements right. I think like the lone Cyberman as an image is great, especially when it's by the lake and, you know, the storm, and it's ooky spooky. And like in Big Finish, Mary Shelley travelled with the 8th Doctor. So by having the story, it kind of wipes that one out from being canon, if you're into that type of shit. But, you know, I'm fine with like expanded universe canon being rewritten if the story's good. That's my number one rule. Because the TV show, that's the correct canon. Everything else is just fun. It's canon if you want it to be, but as soon as it gets rewritten, it's not canon anymore. That's my approach to it. And I think this story is so good that I'm happy to get rid of those Mary Shelley audios. They're gone. And I'm not upset about it. Even though they're good, this episode is that good. I don't mind. And I love the scene where like Graham's like sees a ghost and it's like real. It's a real ghost and like no one talks about it. They just like, it's like laughed off as a joke. And he's like, oh, brilliant. Love that. So silly and stupid. Yeah, it's that perfect balance of scary but fun and exciting and funny and sad. And you really care about the characters and they've all got stuff to do. And yeah, I think it's one of those stories that really is brilliant. So I think that deserves its place as number 2. I would rank it just there as well. And the third episode is Fugitive of the Jadoon, which is my number 1 Jodie Whittaker story. I love it. I think it's great. It's probably the episode I've watched the most. I think Joy Martin was an incredible choice to play the Fugitive Doctor and to play the Doctor in general. She's everything I want in a Doctor. Like she's tough, she's badass, but she's cool and suave and, you know, she's got, you know, you're safe with Joy Martin. You know you're safe with her Doctor. You know, there's some doctors where if you travel with them, I was like, I feel like they'd throw me under the bus if they were given half a chance. Like, I don't trust Tom Baker for a second. That man would let me die. But like doctors like John Pertwee and Joe Martin, you can stand behind them. They put an arm in front of you and they're going to keep you safe. You know, that's the type of doctor I want. And I think Joe Martin is brilliant in the role. I think she is electric. And you can tell how much she enjoys playing it. You can see it on her face. Like, you know, the first scene where Jodie unburies the TARDIS and she looks up and she's like, all right, let's take it from the top. You instantly she's the Doctor. Like, there's no doubt about it. And, you know, when she played like Ruth and then it switches to the Doctor, that change is so strong. And it is such a shame that she has been turned into a cameo Doctor. And it's so wrong because they gave us like the tastiest little snack that is Joe Martin and won't let us have a full meal. It's not fair. It's wrong. It's also the connotations that she's the first Black Doctor as well, and she's relegated to a minor part. And now that Ncuti Gatwa is the first main Black Doctor, she's kind of getting erased like straight away. And people are saying that Ncuti's the first Black Doctor, which in a way he kind of is as a main Doctor. And I hope that doesn't take away from Jo's importance in the show and her performance. But yeah, I love Fugitive of the Jadoon. I think it's a fun story. And I think it's probably one of the first times in like Chibnall's era where it really feels like they want to do something different with the show. And that's what I was looking for from day one. I was like, what are you going to do different? Even though the Timeless Children arc is a bit controversial and people feel very strongly about it, at least they were trying to do something. And that's what I was interested in. But I don't think they ultimately succeeded. But I think Joe Martin was an excellent choice, an incredible choice. All right, so that's the top 3. Let's talk about the bottom 3. In number 22, we have Legend of the Sea Devils. In number 23, we have The Battle of Ranskor Avkolos. And in final place, as number 24, we have Orphan 55. These 3 episode placements didn't surprise me either. All of these stories are probably at the bottom for me as well. There are some other stories I'd probably include in there, but we're not going to get into that right now. Let's talk about Legend of the Sea Devils. This was probably one of the most disappointing things in the Chibnall era for me because I love the Sea Devils. Not just the characters, but also the episode, The Sea Devils. Like, it's one of the best classic series 6-parters for me, for sure. You know, like I was talking about it on repeat. You know, that the term sea friends, I think I invented that. I invented sea friends instead of sea devils. So I was like, sea devils is mean. They're just a bunch of little guys. Let's be nice to the sea friends. And then when the episode came around, I was like, oh my God, what went wrong? I'm not sure because, you know, they don't tell us shit in the behind the scenes, but it feels like we're missing half the story. You know, the episode only runs for like 43 minutes or something like that. Like it's underrunning by like a good 10 minutes. So in my head, I'm like, is the script too short? Or did they just not film everything? Because I feel like it's the latter. I don't think they got everything in the can because it feels so rushed. Like this whole era feels rushed. Like, you know, you're location hopping every 5 seconds. There's like 50,000 characters in one fucking room. You know, it's a bit of a nightmare. But like this story, like what happened? And, you know, I read in Doctor Who magazine that the director, this is her first like TV job. You know, she'd done like short films before, but she hasn't done like a TV production before. So I'm like, was it the director? Was she just not up for it? And I'm hoping that's not the case. But like in the Chibnall era, there was a big push for like giving people their first go in the industry and putting them on Doctor Who, which I think is really admirable. And I think that's great. And I think that's a wonderful thing. But putting them into the director's chair, I don't know about that. I don't think it's fair on them because it doesn't feel like you're supporting them. People need to work their way up the ranks. That's how it works. That's the industry. Like you don't walk into any business and become a manager in like 5 seconds without knowing anything about the business, you know, or having any experience of being a manager. And you're putting them in a sink or swim scenario and you're basically drowning them where you could be giving them the support in order to grow and then take on the job and then do incredible things. But, you know, that's all speculation on my end. I don't know if it was a directing problem or if it was a production problem. Maybe it was COVID problems. Maybe it was the script. Who knows? Because we did find out recently that it originally wasn't going to have the Sea Devils in it. It was just a generic pirate story, more of a historical. And maybe you could tell. The Sea Devils didn't make any sense in the story. And the CGI on the Sea Devils was a bit ropey. In fact, the CGI overall was a bit ropey. And it doesn't help in Australia when I was watching on iView and like the image quality is so bad. It just looks like a mush. And I was like, what am I watching? But yeah, I was very disappointed with Legend of the Sea Devils. It was not the story I thought it was going to be. I thought the idea of like the Sea Devils and pirates sounds fun. I think you could really do something with that. But there was just too many story elements. There was too many characters and not enough time to flesh anything out. Having that many elements in 43 minutes is ridiculous. And it's one of those lessons I think Chris never learnt in his era. Because the one story where Chris didn't have a million characters was Eve of the Daleks. And it's because he recently even said, like the BBC said, like, look, we haven't got any money for this. This is what you can do. And so it was like, okay, I can have limited characters. I can have limited sets. Let's do it. And I think Eve of the Daleks is one of the greatest stories he's written in Jodie's era because it's streamlined. It's one idea. It's two new characters and they actually have something going on. There's a story there. There's actual character dynamic. Yes, the guy in it is a creep, but at least it's a story. You know, like it finally felt like he learned his lesson. I was like, oh, thank God. You know, finally we're at a point where not a million things are going on at once. And then Legend of the Sea Devils came around. And I was like, okay, well, I guess he didn't learn anything. And then Power of the Doctor, we're not going to go into that. We've already talked about that. You know, I hate talking about the bottom three because I feel like I'm just dunking and dunking and dunking. But I do love this show. And, you know, when I'm criticizing it, like I understand that production, things go wrong and it's fine. And I don't think we should they should all be put on trial for making episodes of Doctor Who I don't like. You know, it does come from a place of love because I care. I just want to make that clear. And now let's talk about the Battle of Ranskor Avkolos. Chris recently said that this was a first draft and they shot the first draft. And baby, you can tell. I've only ever watched this story once, so I'm not going to go too much into detail about it because I don't think that's fair. But I think the new series, we've kind of established that the finale of the season is the big episode where the story arc gets resolved and it's big spectacles and lots of things are going on. And it's exciting. And then in this story, there's no story arc of series 11. And the story just kind of happens. And yeah, you've got, what's his name, turning up again, you know, Tooth Man. And yeah, I can't remember anything of worth in that story. It just happens. And then the series is over with this weird little monologue from the Doctor talking about hope. And the reason I don't like Doctor Who focusing too much on hope is because hope is empty. It doesn't mean anything. Being hopeful It's just like, oh, I hope things get better, or it'd be nice if things were good, but they're not. It's such an empty promise. The Doctor should be about change. The Doctor should be enforcing that change. The Doctor should be trying to save people, but just standing back and hoping that things get better is not that. It's nothing. It's empty. So yeah, I should give this story another go, but I'm probably not going to. Maybe in the far future, but not right now, babes. Now let's talk about a story I have given multiple chances to, which is the final episode, which is Orphan 55. I don't hate this story like everyone else does. I think this story is going to slowly go up the rank as time goes on. And I think it's because it's one of those stories that is so bad that it's good. I think it's the Horns of Nymon of the new series. I think you've got ridiculous characters that are funny. You've got stuff like Betty, which is hilarious and stupid and so bad. It's a show. It's like watching a train wreck, and it's like the mishandling of talking about climate change in like the worst way possible. It's like elementary level talking about climate change where you're talking about your own carbon footprint, but aren't talking about the big part of climate change, which everyone knows that it's the corporations that are doing the vast majority of pollution, not the individual person. And the Doctor's standing there like on a soapbox being like, you can change the world if you go out. And it's like, no, you can't. It's completely out of the individual's hands. It is these corporations that are polluting the planet, and we're completely powerless. And the corporations know it. We can try our best to minimize our footprint, but really, it's not going to make any change. Like a really embarrassing, really centrist approach to climate change, where it's saying fuck all, and the actual message is paper thin and it's unhelpful. And I think, and it's also written like the saddest little like PSA of all time. And I think it insults the viewers and it makes them feel like they're stupid. And I'm really not into it. Because I think the message of climate change is important. And I think Doctor Who should tackle stuff like that. Stuff like Praxeus, when it's talking about like plastics and microplastics and stuff like that. I think that's an interesting idea. I don't know. I don't think it's executed well. But, like talking about climate change and using those issues in the story, I definitely welcome, because it is a real problem that affects us all. But it's how you tell those stories that's important. But yeah, who knows? Maybe this story will become slowly up the ranks in future. Like, that the Gunfighters is one of those stories that used to tank, but now it's up higher because people are starting to think, this is funny, this is fun to watch. It's so bad, but it's good at the same time. So who knows? All right, so that was the bottom three. Let's talk about some honorable mentions or just mentions. Some placements I'm quite happy with is Spyfall and Eve of the Daleks at 6 and 7. I think both of those stories are really good. I've talked about them a bit in this podcast already. I'm not surprised that Rosa is number 4. I think that's quite high up. A lot of people love that story. But one of the stories that really surprised me being quite in the middle was The Witchfinders. That's one of my favorite Jodie stories. I'd put that in maybe my top 3. I think I would put Fugitive of the Jadoon, Haunting of Villa Diodati, and then maybe The Witchfinders. And I say that because it's a story that I've rewatched multiple times. So I feel like if I've rewatched it a lot, it's a story that I clearly like. I think like Alan Cumming is great in it. And I think it's one of the few stories where the Doctor being a woman is actually impactful in the story, which I wish they did a bit more. I think I've talked about this in a previous podcast as well. I don't think every single episode should be about the Doctor being a woman, but I feel like it should come up. I feel like it's something that didn't come up very often. And in The Witchfinders, it's very much a story where, the Doctor being tried as a witch is something that wouldn't have happened to Peter Capaldi, for example, And I like when they do stuff like that. It's more interesting. I'm surprised The Woman Who Fell to Earth is number 8. I thought that'd be higher up. I thought that was such a strong opening for Jodie. But I think a lot of people feel a bit about it because it set up this really exciting brand new show and then it just didn't live up to that. Like every single episode afterwards was nothing like that. It had nothing of the sort. So yeah, I don't know. I'm happy Praxeus is number 19. I hate that story so much. And Can You Hear Me is number 17. I hate that story. It's so boring. It's such a cool idea, but it's just executed in the most boringest way possible. You know, anything to do with the Eternals and Doctor Who is always kind of cool and interesting and different, but it was so boring. But I'm happy essentially the Cybermen / The Timeless Children came in at 16, so it wasn't at the right bottom. Because, you know, it's such a controversial episode. I was worried people were just going to keep rating it 0, but I'm happy where it sits. I think it's a fun episode. Overall, with this entire era, I think Jodie did a pretty decent job with what she was given. You know, I wish this era had more emotion in it because, you know, I literally cry during any TV show. It's not hard to get me to cry. I'm weak. I just want to feel something. And, you know, in this entire era, I didn't cry once. Not even once. And that is weird for me. Not even when Jodie regenerated. And that was really sad. You know, I was really sad that this era didn't resonate with me because I saw with other people it was. And I'm like, what am I missing? Like, what am I not seeing that other people are seeing? But the majority of people were on my side as well, which was sad. I didn't want to be one of those people who didn't like Doctor Who anymore. You know, this is my show. It's my favorite TV show. I could talk about it till the fucking cows come home. Like, look, I'm doing it right now. But, you know, I'm happy that the show found that sense of fun and excitement in series 12. And I felt like it did do a course correction and it was going in a place where I was enjoying it a lot more. I think the big things that I didn't like about this era was that there was too many characters. There were too many ideas. I think there were great ideas in there, but they couldn't just focus on one. It's very much the Ryan Murphy approach. You know, if you've ever watched American Horror Story, the first like half is really good. And then it gets like episode 5 or 6. And it's like he gets really bored with what he's writing. He gets bored of the concept. He's like, all right, let's do a full 180 and to do a completely different show. And we're going to push it into different directions. And then it's always worse. And it's just, yeah, I just kind of felt like Christian Mill had that as well. I think the issue is Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat are both exceptional, top of the top writers. I think they're both people who are at the top of their game. And I think Chris Chibnall is a good writer, but he's not on their level. And I don't think many people are on their level. And I think he was given an impossible task. And I think he did the best that he could, but it just didn't live up to what I was looking for. But yeah, that's my thoughts, feelings, and emotions about the 13th Doctor's era. I hope it wasn't too doom and gloom. I hope this wasn't depressing. I hope it wasn't mean. Especially, I hope it wasn't mean because I'm never trying to be mean. I said mean like 50 times, but I think I've lost the meaning of the word mean. Mean. But yep, we'll be right back after this message from our sponsors. This is the segment where I, Josh Snares, answers questions from the audience, which is you. If you have a question, query, or quandary that you'd like to ask me, send an email to whovianapod@gmail.com. That's whovianapod@gmail.com. Our first question for today comes from James Coppen. Coppen? I've never said your name out loud. Sorry, James. James asks, how do you fit Nyssa and Tegan's story from Farewell Sarah Jane, The Power of the Doctor, and the Season 20 collection trailer together? Short answer, babes, I don't. I have no idea how all three of them connect. My rule in general is that TV is king. If it happens on the TV show, that's canon. Everything outside is open to interpretation. If they fit within canon, they can be canon. But if they don't fit in with the TV canon, they're not canon. That's my personal approach. I think the Season 20 collection set where Tegan is in that short episode and Nyssa appears and all that for me fits in continuity better because, you know, Tegan's in the Power of the Doctor outfit. It feels like a natural progression. But in that episode, she's clearly not married to Nyssa. And in the Power of the Doctor, there's no mention of her marriage with Nyssa. I don't really feel like they're married in real life. I don't see that connection between the two of them. I think it doesn't make it really any sense. But I'm not mad at people who believe in that. I think that's fine. If you love that, then that's great. You know, I'm not against it in any way, shape, or form. I just see them as friends. You know, that's the honest truth. I just do. But, you know, if Tegan rocks up again and she's like, you know, I'm hooking up with Nyssa, I'd be all for that. I'm not getting mad at that whatsoever. So it's open to interpretation, I guess. And our second question comes from Macro99, my good friend Jack. Jack asks, do you have any plans for guests on the pod? So far, I haven't asked anyone, but But I'd love to get the 50% Doctor Who podcast boys, Aidan and Connor. They're Aussie podcasters from Perth. And I love their show and I've been on it a few times. So I'd love to have them on. Obviously Billy and Matt from Review of Death. I love them so much. They're so funny and nice. There's heaps of people I'd love to have on the podcast. But this is very much something I'm kind of doing solitary at the moment. I like to just talk into a camera and just be my own thing without trying to organize like a cross-country communication thing. But never say never. I'm open to doing it in the future. I've been on heaps of different people's podcasts before and I've always enjoyed it. So I'd love to invite people on mine this time, you know. I think if I did have people on, it'd be like its own segment. Because, you know, I don't think I'd want them sitting through me complaining about stuff in the Karen segment, you know. I was thinking maybe I could do something like Fuck, Marry, Kill. And you have to choose like, I present like 3 different people in Doctor Who and have to say who they'd fuck and who they'd marry and who they'd kill. I thought that'd be fun. But yeah, I don't know. And that's the end of another episode. Can you believe it? Thank you for listening and watching Whoviana. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Snares YouTube channel or subscribe to Whoviana on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can follow the pod on Instagram and TikTok at WhovianaPod. If you have any questions for the Q and Gay segment, please email them to whovianapod@gmail.com. That's whovianapod@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the pod, consider donating to my Ko-fi account at ko-fi.com/Josh Snares. Thank you once again for watching, and I will see you next time on Whoviana or else. Whoviana is a podcast by Josh Snares. Music by Barnabas Sharp. The word Whoviana was invented by Gemma Boyd.